In 3, 2, 1, we are live. Welcome back to Tea and Crones. Thank you for joining us. Here we are again, episode 9. And why don't we start out, for those of us who haven't participated before, with introductions. So why don't we start with Corbie?
Okay. The usual. Good evening, or as we say in New York, hello there. I'm Corbie Midline, been reading since I was 18. I'm 66, certified professional tarot reader, tarot master, past life specialist. My full-time job, but I'm absolutely practical, no glurpy purple with angels where we are. And I'm with my fave peeps.
Thank you, thank you. And we have the lovely Miss Katrina.
Hi, I'm Katrina Raspold, or as we say in Kentucky, how's your mama and them? I am currently in California and have been here for around 25 years, and then lived in California previous to that for about 10 years. So I really consider myself to be an effective transplant by now. I don't expect to live anywhere else. My husband and I own and operate Crossroads Metaphysical Store in Shingle Springs, California. I'm a professional healer here at the store, and I also do professional spell work for people. Also teach classes and have written around 39 books on different metaphysical subjects. And what else do I do? I don't know, y'all. What do I do? I don't know. That's what I do. Mom of 6, grown people out there loose in the world, ranging in age from 21 to 43. And I have been a tarot reader since I was 18. I'm now 59. And yeah, that's my world. Welcome to it.
Wonderful. And of course, I am Dahlia Rose. I am the voice of the people here, your bridge to the broadcast. And so what we're coming together tonight to do is talk about grief and its management. Now, this is an awesome opportunity to acknowledge that one of our lovely viewers gave us this topic. So keep them coming, guys. Grief is something that's touched all our lives, and everyone handles it in such a different way. And so this was a great opportunity to get some different perspectives, learn really how to move through it, and understand that what worked once may not work again. And again, we're going to discuss the different types of grief. So as always, we want to hear from you. Make sure you're in the comment section letting us know some of your stories. We'd love to hear them. Make sure to say hi. And I think I'm supposed to say like and subscribe somewhere in this. So be sure to do that so you know when we're live next time. So on the topic of grief, I think this is a great space to define what it is and what it could potentially look like. I'd like to start, if I could, with Miss Katrina.
Oh, hey. So it's interesting that you bring up that topic of what constitutes grief, because when we think about grief, we usually think about the grief that comes through death of a loved one. And we were having a mini conversation before we went live about what we consider grief to be. And of course, there's grief in all sorts of life situations. In my class today, I was teaching some prospective healers. We were starting our basic healer class, and we were talking about imbalances, and that most dis-ease in people and circumstances comes from some type of imbalance. And there are 2 types of imbalances that occur. One is an intrusion, where something that wasn't previously there is now there and creating a disruption, such as a problematic boss that you didn't have before, or I don't know, a neighbor that's a problem, something from the outside that's creating discord. But there's also discord that comes through the opposite of intrusion, which is loss. And that is where something that was present in our lives now is not present. And there are so many feelings and circumstances that come up with loss. And any of that, I believe, can be attributed to grief or defined as grief. So it's basically the loss of something that was previously there and the reaction that we have to that loss. And that can take many forms. So that's my definition of grief.
Wonderful. Great perspective on all of that. Very clear definitions. Corbie, any additives to what grief is in your experience?
Well, the idea of there are different kinds of, we can grieve what we have lost of ourselves. I'm certainly not the person at 66 with cancer surgeries in behind me that I was when I was the hot to trot 25-year-old. Do I miss her? Don't miss her brain, miss what she looks like. Then there's the grief when we lose a person, a heart's partner, whether it's our father, whether it's a pet that we're really attached to. It is another living being and all of a sudden gone. And then there is grieving the world. The world the way it was when I was growing up is just not there. We were talking earlier, some friends of mine, when we were 5, even in Camden, New Jersey, in the 1960s, I could go out and trick or treat all by myself and I was fine. That world is gone. It is as gone as planet Zorch. And so we grieve that because it's lost, we're not coming back. For me, grief is, you've got to grieve it, because if you don't grieve it, it festers. But then you move through the grief and decide what you can take from what was lost, whether it's a memory, whether it's a lesson, whatever, and move on. But that takes time. Grief takes time, not a timetable.
Absolutely. To Corbie's point, there's not a timetable. It's an individual experience. And then even down from that individual experience, one shouldn't expect to move through grief consistently in the same way. Katrina spoke to intrusions versus loss. I think it's easier, in my experience, to grieve an intrusion versus a loss. But in any case, it's different for everyone. Now, I had mentioned pre-broadcast that we might go into why we experience grief, but I think that's pretty obvious, right? Like that's we need to experience change. But do you guys have any other thoughts on why we experience that process, and the necessity of it?
I think it's a way of honoring what we've lost a little bit.
Okay.
I don't know if there's a difference between grieving and mourning. Katrina, I'd like to know, what is grieving and mourning, are they the same or are they two completely different things?
I think they're similar enough that we can use them interchangeably. Mourning, I think, tends to be more proactive as far as emotional investiture, whereas grief identifies the process. Mourning is what you're actually doing. And I think that mourning is, grief and mourning both are such strange beasts that you can't really nail down how a person is going to grieve or anticipate that. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was one of the 2 people that set up the stages of grief. And they're very famous and applied to many circumstances. It's a very wise perspective. But at the same time, we can't ever predict or dictate how an individual is going to move through those stages. And even within one person, we grieve differently depending on the situation. We grieve differently for the loss of a parent than we do for the loss of a pet. We grieve differently according to where we are in our lives and the support system we have around us and our needs. And really, when we grieve, we're identifying a loss for ourselves. We're rarely grieving anything that went on with that person. They're now out of pain if it's a person that we're grieving, if it's a death. We are the ones who are grieving for ourselves and for missing what isn't there anymore.
Right.
And I've had, oh gosh, my grandparents have all passed. My aunt who helped raise me is gone. My mother and father are gone. I grieve that I'm estranged from my two brothers and never ever speak to them. They're gone. Um, we grieve past relationships and think about those sometimes. There's so much, but I wouldn't say that I'm mourning those things. I would say that I recognize their loss as part of my process and still feel that sometimes. But to me, mourning implies a more long-term investment of that emotion.
Mm.
Is mourning also kind of the ritual part of it? Because I hear mourning and I think about, the tearing of the clothes and the sackcloth and the ashes, that the methodologies that
Maybe.
people show.
Yeah,
But the other thing is, we grieve lost opportunities.
absolutely.
Somebody was there yesterday and today they got hit in a car accident. Oh my God, all the things I didn't tell them.
Mhm.
Um,
The way that we grieve different circumstances too changes, because if a person dies of old age in their sleep, we have a different grief response than if a person commits suicide.
Mm. Absolutely.
So it's circumstantial as well.
So with regard to the types of grief that you guys have just discussed, is there, well, let's talk about possibly managing some of those circumstances. So when you are dealing with a person who passes away, Corbie, what has been some of your process with managing those circumstances? What does it look like start to finish? Well, if it is finished.
no, with me, it generally gets finished. Do I still miss? Yes, of course. The person that I have grieved for most has been my father, since he was my best friend. He was the only one in the family who admitted what I did. But, and yes, I can talk to him because I'm a medium, but the difference is, what I mourn is who he was here, coming down the stairs at the house in he ratty bathrobe and the slippers down at the heels, and arguing with the New York Times crossword puzzle. That's gone. I'll never talk to that part of Dad, because that gets hung up in the personality closet when we transition. There is the facing of reality and realizing, I tell people, we've all got an expiration date on the warranty. Nobody gets an extended one.
Mm.
So in that sense, part of me starts the grieving when I first meet somebody, because I'm so aware of the ephemeral part of friends, whether it's for 2 months or 40 years. So I let myself grieve. I let myself talk out loud to them and tell them everything I didn't get to tell them here. And then I remind myself I'm still here and I have a life. And if I missed a lot of things that they did or were, then I'll go honor those things. Example, dear friend of mine, Ashley Frazier. She was so excited. She was going on the first adult vacation she ever had to the Dominican Republic with her partner. They were not there 30 minutes when somebody T-boned the cab and she was killed instantly.
Wow.
She was late 40s. And they were planning to move up here. I was going to have a close friend. He was great. What did I do? Raged a little. But then I decided what would honor Ashley most. And that's how I got involved in the cat rescue that I've worked with for 6 years down in the Bronx. Does it bring Ashley back? No. But I tuck some of her energy with me every time I save a feral cat, every time I find a home, because her feral cats, her fuzzies, were so important to her. And that, as well as honoring her, heals me because a little bit of her feels like it's still here. You can't always do that. But to me, if you can find a little piece of the person or the situation you lost that you can tuck in with you and realize not everything is totally gone, that helps. But in a case like Katrina's, where it's an estranged relationship, I'm not sure how you would do that. Katrina, do you have anything that you hold on to from the past with your brothers, or have you had to totally Velcro away the
Oh
energy?
no, it's all gone. Yeah.
Do you have a process for managing loss of loved ones that have passed?
Well, again, it's something that you have to, even within yourself, address as an individual circumstance. And I do a lot of grief counseling in my practice, and have had a lot of experience with grief myself. I just had my cousin pass a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, and she was about 4 years younger than me. And that was a tough one. My friend Jennifer died last May, and I'm still working on that. So there's, again, approaching each circumstance as its own unique place that is specific to that moment is what's important, whether you're counseling or experiencing the grief yourself, that you don't, that you, I guess, respect the individuality of the grief in each moment and even in each day, that you're going to have up days, you're going to have down days. You want to minimize any frustration that you feel with the person who's grieving. It's very easy to start to think, it's been 3 years since your wife died. You need to snap out of it.
Right.
Well, apparently they don't, because that's not the space where they are. And whether it's, or even a relationship, especially with relationships, somebody has a relationship that ends badly. As friends, we often want to just push them right back out there to find somebody else. And they may still be in that grieving process for grieving the loss of that relationship and not be ready for that to happen. So I think it's important that we minimize frustration with the person who's grieving within ourselves, but also that we don't minimize the loss that they are feeling. One of the worst things, for instance, when a woman is grieving a miscarriage or a stillbirth, is to say, oh, you can have other babies. We wouldn't do that. And so it's the same. You're not going to have other fathers. You're not going to have you may have other best friends, but it's not going to be the same relationship you had with that best friend who walked away for whatever reason or who passed away. And so, we come up with these euphemisms for died. We don't like to say that someone died. We say that they passed away. We say that they are no longer with us, or we come up with some softening way to say they died, because to say my son died is too hard. When my friend Jennifer died, it was at the very beginning of COVID. It was in May of last year. We had one gal who was able to get in and be with her when she died. And the family had gotten very frustrated with her because when someone would walk into the room, Jennifer would say, I'm dying. And when they would proceed to talk about dying, which was very Jennifer. And the family, I guess, was not comfortable with that. They felt that that was too brazen, but that's how Jennifer needed to deal with her own death, was to speak to it. And, everybody in that circumstance has to manage it in the same way. But again, we can't minimize the loss that any person who's grieving is experiencing. So really it's about holding space for them.
Yes.
And letting them feel what they feel. Grief is just its own animal, and it's impossible to manage it. I think you can only work around it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's some cultural implications here too, right? So in some cultures, they will not grieve because they feel that the soul won't be able to move on. If you get into the grief process, you create an attachment, and don't allow them to evolve. One of our audience members was just sharing that with the loss of loved ones, it's difficult to manage, and she believes on some level that she's being selfish. And I think that I think selfishness is okay. I think self-serving. I think we conflate self-serving and selfishness because there's a need to, like Katrina was saying, go through your own process.
Absolutely.
So, can you guys speak to that selfishness piece? I mean, how do you navigate that? Katrina, do you have thoughts?
I think that if we were to really break that down and look at somebody and say it's really selfish the way they're grieving, that sounds horrible to
Absolutely.
say. And so I think that selfish versus self-serving, I think we owe it to ourselves to be self-serving when we're grieving. We owe it to ourselves to treat ourselves as though we are experiencing one of the highest traumas you can go through.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a little more pragmatic where death is concerned. Now, granted, I have not had a spouse die. I have not had my child die, which are two of the most traumatic things you can go through. We expect that our parents are not going to live longer than we do. So that's understood. As we age as Crones, we start to understand our acquaintances are going to start dropping like flies around us. And that grief becomes, as a Crone, something you walk hand in hand with. And so you'd better find some survival tools to deal with it, or you're going to be in mourning constantly. And of course, Queen Victoria mourned Albert so much that she always wore black until she died.
And laid out his clothes.
Sorry?
Didn't she also lay out his clothes?
And laid out his clothes, yeah. And she was halfway through her life when he died.
Yeah.
So sometimes we can just immerse to what I would consider an unhealthy degree into grief. But apparently that's what that person needs to do. And I think there are some people, unfortunately, who define themselves by their grief. And that's when it becomes almost dangerous, because you wonder about the quality of life of the living and how all that translates. So that becomes a difficult road to navigate as a healer, because you have to recognize where they are and honor where they are, but also attempt to lead them to a point of extrication from that mourning so that they can go on to have a full and vibrant life, with the understanding that that grief will likely be with them. And we look at that, I can't remember where it is, but there's an Indonesian tribe that actually every year digs up their dead and dresses them and has communion with them and then reburies them. And to them, that is part of their grieving construct, is to honor them in that way. And so, like you were saying, there are a lot of cultural relevancies, like the ofrendas in Mexico, which are the altars to the dead and the ancestors. And so we really just have to work within each person's societal, cultural, and emotional and mental states to see what's going to serve them best as far as the self-serving, or whether what they're doing is selfish. Now, in a way, if you're grieving and you lock yourself in your room for years and don't raise your child, then that's selfish. That's something where you're not coming outside of your own feelings enough to take care of a person who is wholly dependent on you. We often see this in cases of siblings where one dies and one lives. And we have the challenges that, maybe it's the favorite child who died, or the surviving child has some survivor's guilt of some kind. There's just so many aspects to look at in regard to that.
Right. Corbie, would you have any thoughts around the selfishness topic?
It is selfishness. Really don't like that word. I'd love to find another word. Self-care, self-healing, I'm not sure what. But if someone had said, like she said, oh, you can have another child, that's not the point. The point is the specific child was gone. So even if you don't see that the person or thing that was lost should be that important to the other person. That's not yours to judge. All you are there to do is deep listening, full compassion, and asking, how can I support you? Sometimes not how can I help, because you can't help, but you can support.
Right.
And no matter what you would have done, if you were in their place, you're not. You know, you're Catholic, you may not understand why your Jewish friend has to sit Shiva for 7 days. Well, it's what they do. You bring them a casserole and you sit Shiva with them. Managing grief is friends coming to you as you need them. There are indeed some places where death is celebrated because you're going to the heavenly place. And if that's what they need to do to grieve the loss, but see it as a blessing, join that with them. Don't look at them and say, oh, you shouldn't be feeling that way. Who the hell are you and who made you God?
Right.
This is what they do to take care of themselves. And when we have great loss like that, it's absolutely appropriate if that's what they need.
You all have reminded me of a time when I had a client who lost her husband. When at the time that we met, she had lost him 2 years earlier. And she was very stoic, so she was always talking about her grief process needing to be over. And what ended up occurring between us was her attending classes and experiencing joy, but right around the same time of year, that haze of grief would start to come over her, and she would want to experience healing sessions not as a point of getting away from it, but as a point of so much relaxation that she could feel him near, it within a safe space. And I wanted to draw attention to how sometimes grief and other traumas manifest yearly, at the same time of year. And so the body has to go through its experiences again. The cellular memory starts to release, and it's almost like it's almost like the perfume of grief. You start to wear it again and go through the motions in that way. And I think this speaks to both of you saying there's no timeline for this. You may be good, and then, same time every year you re-experience. Now we have some awesome audience sharing, so I want to make sure that I honor and acknowledge what we have here. I think we incidentally answered this question, but I'll say it, from Spaniel Spam. Do either of you have any tips for the non-grieving person in communicating with people who are grieving? How do you know how to continue to communicate with them in a language they can hear? And I think you both kind of touched on that around holding space and coming to them with what their needs are, and instead of what we think they need. Do you think we kind of touched on that?
Asking, how can I support you? Yes.
Yes.
Also, we have to suspend any thought of what that person should be doing.
Right.
That completely goes away, and we allow them to be. But at the same time, you need to be very tuned in to what they're saying and not saying, and showing you and what and not showing you. Sometimes they don't want to focus on their grief. Sometimes the way that you're going to be there for them and hold space for them is to take them out rock climbing, or take them thrift store shopping, or something that gets them out of their own head for a little while. And not forcing that to happen, but finding out what it is that they need. A friend of mine had lost her wife 3 years ago. And so I worked very hard with her to try and figure out if she's needing me to sit and talk with her about Nikki and share time with her and memories about her, or if she's needing me to get her away from that grieving space for a little while and go out and do something, or laugh about something else, or have a different talk or different experience. And I think one of the hardest things is when they perceive that you're treating them differently because they're grieving.
Mm.
They're still the same person who's going through a trauma. And so a lot of times they're avoiding people because they're afraid the person's going to treat them differently, or do the head tilt. And, oh, are you okay? No, I'm not okay. And I'm not even close to being okay. So I think that just holding the space and finding out, as Corbie was saying, from them, what can we do today? What do you feel like doing today that would have you feel like I'm the best thing in your life that can happen today? Whether that's just holding them while they cry, or letting them vent, or getting them outside their own headspace, whatever it might be. It's not always just managing the grief that's the issue. Sometimes it's not even acknowledging the grief for a day or two. That is what they need.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't mean that they're done grieving. It's a grieving space. I mean, y'all may be out shopping the Miracle Mile, and then all of a sudden their face crumples and they have to go sit. You, as the supportive friend, have to be ready to drop into that deep listening. You can't think, oh my God, what did I do? You can't think, oh my God, isn't she over this yet? It is just going to hit people out of the blue. And when you see that happening, she sits, you sit, you listen, you're there, you're present. Because that is one of the strongest, most non-judgmental things you can do as a support system. And if that's you that's crumpling, you don't beat yourself up. You don't grab your kitchen and say, I should be over this by now. God damn it, no, you shouldn't. Not until you are ready to. So don't be embarrassed and don't apologize. If all of a sudden you've got a weeping tsunami, you sit and you do it. They will understand.
I think there's an opportunity here to acknowledge within that question, perhaps, a desire to be helpful, but also checking in with yourself to make sure that it's not your discomfort that wants to communicate in a way that they can hear. Like, you can definitely hear the intention of love behind the process of supporting them, but also acknowledging, like, oh, wait a minute, I don't know if I'm capable of handling this. I hear that a lot, like, my family member is going through this and I just don't know if I'll have the right thing to say, rather than, as you guys are saying, showing up and just being present, knowing that the right thing will just drop in and fall in on
I
your
think
heart.
one of the worst things you can do, Dahlia, is you sense your discomfort over the fact that your friend is grieving.
Mhm.
And so you don't contact
Mm.
because you're afraid of saying the wrong thing. And that is really, it's dressed up as an altruistic thing. I'm afraid I'm going to say the wrong thing, so I'm not going to reach out. But really, it's ego.
Yeah.
It's about the ego of saying, I can't bear to be wrong. I can't bear to hurt. I'm afraid of what I'm going to feel if I go into this. I'm afraid I'm going to be triggered. And really, you have to suspend that and reach out. Even they have the option of not taking your phone call or looking at your text and answering it later, but reach out. Be there, even if it's tough. It is hard to be there for grieving people because people don't know what to do with grief. But it's important that you're there and that you show up.
Absolutely.
Not on their doorstep.
And especially with divorce, oh my God. All of a sudden, everybody was friends with the two people, okay? And then they split up, and all of a sudden, half those people don't contact one partner or the other. And it's either because they're on team A or team B, which try not to be, or I don't know what to say to them. I don't know who they are without their partner. Well, now it's time to find out, especially because when you're divorced, more the widow. It's like, who was I before I married this person? I don't know. I need to find them again. And that's when you really need your friends to go on that exploration with you.
Mm.
A lot of times with divorce too, it really becomes a place of insecurity, because when you're couples with somebody and everybody's paired off, you feel comfortable and balanced. But as soon as somebody's single, all of a sudden you get the feeling that they're predatory. You start to think, oh, well, no, she's on the move now. She's not going to get around my husband. And you can't work with that, really. I mean, all of a sudden a person becomes suspect because their marriage ended or their partnership ended. And that's a really harsh place to be. That shows more that you need work than they need work.
Right. Absolutely. We do have another question here. And I want to honor Denise's sharing. She was mentioning how hard it is. She's grieving a friend who died of a brain tumor and continuing to support her kids. So thank you, Denise, for sharing that with us. As you stated, it's still hard. It's still challenging. But as we've said, um, we're here to support you as community. And again, we thank you for your vulnerability. With our next audience question, which I thought was a decent question. They said, I've had experiences where the relationship with the grieving person became so one-sided and so grief-centered as to make a two-way energy exchange impossible. Do you stay away or wait it out? Thoughts, Katrina?
Absolutely. And you will find people who completely immerse in grief for the long time, so for the long haul, so that even years later, when you talk to them, it's impossible to have a conversation without it becoming about their grief. And we talked at the very beginning about balances and imbalances, and that is one of the imbalances, when there is nothing there anymore but the grief, and they have started to define themselves by the grief. Often these are people, and I don't mean to completely stereotype, but often these are people who didn't have a whole lot of identifiers in their lives before the grief happened. So this becomes a label that they wear, almost martyr-like. And it's exhausting to be around. And that's a terrible thing. That's real shadow work there. People don't like to address how exhausting it is to be around a perennially grieving person, but it really is. And so what you have to do is just understand that what you're looking at is a new form of the person that you know. It's something that was possibly always there, taking different forms, but that this has been activated now and may or may not shift. It's what they need. I mean, we never get away from the idea that that's what they need to go through to grieve, but there is a responsibility for what you expose your energy to and how you allow it to affect your personal space. And so the obligation to provide support is dictated by your ability to mitigate the impact of being with that person. And so what I suggest is, if you're finding that this is just an ongoing thing, and I'm not talking about, oh, it's been 4 months and they're not over it yet. I'm talking about for years that this goes on. You really have to shore up before you're with that person. You have to have in your mind the amount of time you're going to spend with that person. You know what? 2 hours I'm going to invest, and then I'm going to have to go, so that you know that there's, for lack of a better term, an outcoming. You know where your safety place is, and to keep yourself safe on that, and definitely ground and shield before you're going into that circumstance, because sometimes someone's grief is so overwhelming that it's impossible to be present with it and stay solvent. So, don't get in over your head. Let them find other ways to let them know you care about them.
Corbie, any sharings on that?
Katrina hit so many bullseyes on that. If someone's grief is so long-term and it's washing over your seawalls, don't drown. You have a right to say, I love you, but I need to step away from this for a little while. It doesn't mean you're cold. It doesn't mean you're cruel. It means that if this grief washing over you makes you so toxic, you're not going to help them and you're not good for you, she'll just have one more thing to mourn, baby. So you must honor your own boundaries. Every single place in life, maybe honoring boundaries is another thing we could put down on the subject things. You've got to honor your own boundaries. There's only so much you can offer. You can't offer what you don't have. So first thing to do, if you are the support person, is do not feel guilty. Force your self-care. And for the person who is grieving, do not feel dissed, because they are going to where they need to be so that they will be in your life for the long term.
Also, something I think that really needs to come out here is we're talking about presumably supporting friends who are grieving. That likely means that you yourself are not a professional grief counselor. You're not a psychiatrist. You're not a psychologist. You may be, however, probably not, given percentages. And so when someone is immersed in their grief for long periods of time and are remaining very dramatic about it, usually what's going on is that they feel that if they stop grieving this person, then they have officially lost that person. And so they continue the grieving as some kind of homage to that person that's gone. When we reach that point, it is very important that this person seek professional assistance with their grief. So even though we are kind and loving friends, we have a cap on what we can do as mundane lay people to assist. We are not professionals in this. And so don't ever be afraid to push a card at somebody and say, this is the name of a grief counselor that I've heard is very good and I think could do amazing things in helping you process this. Because that professional help does need to step in at a point where we have, not that there's a limit, but we've reached a point that it's truly compromising the quality of life potential for this person. And wow, those are some fantastic comments, Dahlia. I'm so grateful to our audience for participating on that level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it sounds like both of you are sort of speaking to, there's just not a blanket answer for do you stay or do you go. It is, that's an internal decision. I think this is a great opportunity to highlight the word boundaries, to say that boundaries are flexible. So some days you'll be able to extend and open up, and other days you won't be able to. So thank you, Spaniel Spam, for sharing that. And I want to honor that she went on to talk about the specifics of the grief and loss. So again, thank you for your vulnerability in the comments section. We have some really great like the way that you all have brought information together, and I want to recap a little bit. So, with regard to the types of grief that we've spoken of, intrusions versus loss versus losing parts of ourselves versus losing loved ones, and world grief, as Corbie mentioned, the loss of pets. All of these have different implications, different levels of processing that are required. And then going on to talk about the cultural implications of what grief looks like and how you honor that grief versus mourning loss. Then we talked about basically the importance of honoring the process and not to hurry through that process. There's no need to fluff or try to usher people through their moment. And it's important to just show up as what they need, to ask those questions, and to not minimize their grief, as Katrina had put it. Overall, the umbrella being hold space. Self-care is important as well as the grieving person. I think, to Katrina's point of professional help, as you may slide somebody a card or have a list ready of individuals as well as grief groups, those are available too. Maybe you go and check in to professional help yourself to say, this is triggering me. And, you realize that maybe you hadn't grieved something fully and your friend is bringing that out, or whoever you're supporting is bringing that out. So with all of those things in mind, any other thoughts on the grief process here from either of you? Corbie?
Here's one. Sometimes people grieve and grieve and grieve because they are afraid, if I stop grieving, does that mean I really didn't love them? It's when I do an awful lot of the radical forgiveness work, people say to me, if I forgive this person, does it mean it was all right they hurt me? I said, no, it's not. Forgiveness is not, it's okay, you hurt me, you can do it again. It's, I totally let go of the energy. It's gone. And so you may hear the grieving person go over and over and over. Use your underhearing to see if it's that they're afraid if they stop grieving, people will think they're cold. You really didn't care. They will need the reassurance that they're allowed to stop grieving when they want to as well. It is not a life sentence.
Absolutely. Katrina, any other thoughts around the grief process?
I do. We are in a very strange, not unprecedented because these things have happened before, but a very strange place of grieving right now with COVID. We have people that are dying in hospitals alone without their family able to be around them. And so we don't have the connectiveness of being with that person when they die, of hearing their last words, of holding them, of holding their hand, and starting that grieving process in a normal way. We also, the other side of this is that we have a lot of souls that are passing feeling like they have unfinished business because they didn't get to say goodbye. They didn't get to finalize their time here with the people that they love because of COVID. And with the enormous number of people that have died, it's like in Ghostbusters where Winston says, that's a big Twinkie. I mean, that's really what all of us who act as mediums and channels for the other side and sensitive people who work on the other side of the veil are experiencing right now is this incredible flow of lost souls and people wanting to finalize and say goodbye and connect with their loved ones because they didn't get to do that. And I think that that is creating grief that has a different flavor to it that we're having to manage. Another thing that came up that I know both of you probably have seen as well is that in addition to COVID, we suddenly have a lot of people dying of non-COVID related illnesses and circumstances, more so than we normally have. So not only has COVID death affected us in the last year, but an increased amount of other non-COVID deaths has been in play. So this has been a very grief-filled year for people and for the souls that have passed.
Absolutely.
So that patience is all the more needed, and also assisting these people with saying their last goodbyes and connecting with those souls that have passed.
It's interesting you brought that up. I it'll be interesting to see how Day of the Dead is celebrated this year, for sure. And I think the other challenging piece to all of this is that for the first time for many people, they have space and time to actually grieve instead of going, I got to get it together. I got to go to work. There is a mass amount of time for them to just sit with themselves and sit with their feelings, which makes it even harder.
We're
So,
also not getting to go to funerals.
yeah,
And that's one of our cultural ways of saying goodbye, is to go to the memorial service of the funeral. We can't have gatherings, and the virtual just is not the same.
absolutely. Absolutely not. So, I think we are at a good place to close. This was a bit of a heavy topic, but I think, I at least I hope we were able to bring some normalcy to the experience of grief. You can see from three different perspectives, and also within our audience comments, which were awesome, guys. Thank you so much for your participation on such a heavy topic, and your vulnerability. That there is no set way. However you choose to grieve is yours. The most important thing and message maybe in this circumstance is to grieve and not to avoid it. But as always, I love to leave our audience with closing remarks. So I'm going to shuffle things over to Corbie for last words.
I think this is one of the deepest, most intense tea and Crones we've had, but I think it was so important because this is not something that's often talked about. And the fact that the audience listened, they allowed it to come in, they shared with us, was incredible. And please, everybody watching, without you, there is no point to this. So every time you come in, every time you share, every time you don't shy away from the tougher stuff like this, you make a difference in the world, not only to us, but it will be paid forward. You will make a difference in the world. Thank you so much.
All said. Closing remarks, Katrina?
Not too much, really. Just thanks to the Tea and Crones community that's growing up around us. Thanks for your support. We're working to build that outreach so that we can share time with more Crones and Crone aficionados. And thanks for being here and for navigating this tough subject with us.
Absolutely.
Happy birthday, Corbie.
2 weeks ago. Happy spring, everybody.
I'm hanging on to it for all of March, okay?
Okay.
Thank you again, guys. And if you all have more questions, more comments, you can continue to reach out to us. Again, this was a heavy topic. Hit the comments section, hit our Facebook page, hit our website, our email, do all the things. And if you feel so compelled to experience mediumship, I believe both of you do mediumship, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So
it's not my primary thing, but it's not on tap to me. They talk when they want to.
Same here.
What I would tell you is I'm not Dahlia dead.
Yeah.
Bam Rose is on a field trip. She won't be by the phone. But yes, I am a medium, and I will not. I will probably be pickier than you are about whether we really have them. So yeah.
Okay. Well, with regard to Corbie being a medium and Katrina being in the grief counseling field, you have many opportunities for healing. And so if you need it, reach out. If they can't help you, they are full of the utmost integrity and will tell you that and have great resources. So with that, again, thank you. You can catch Katrina this Thursday at which is at the Crossroads on Facebook Live. And Corbie, I believe we will have a free reading hour next month.
And meanwhile, there's lots of new videos going up on the YouTube channel.
Absolutely. So you can take part in meditations for Patreon or any other ways you can access these ladies any way you like. There is no limit. And so with that, I will close us out and tell everyone goodbye and good night. And